Hi, K-pop lovers. Welcome back to the channel. If you've been anywhere near K-pop Twitter or TikTok in the last few weeks, you've probably seen the clips, screenshots, fan cams, comment sections lighting up in a way that feels different from the usual fandom chatter. Because this time, MONSTIEZ aren't just debating who had the best solo stage or whose vocals stood out during the CHOOM World Tour's Seoul run. They're asking a much harder question, and it's one that YG Entertainment has yet to answer. Before we get into it, if you care about how this industry treats its youngest stars, stick around, because this conversation matters more than another outfit ranking video ever could. And if you want more honest, detail-driven breakdowns like this one, subscribing genuinely helps this channel keep having these conversations. Let's set the scene. BABYMONSTER kicked off their CHOOM World Tour with back-to-back shows in Seoul, and by most accounts, the performances were exactly what fans expected from a group that spent the last year proving they can headline stadiums. Vocals were sharp, choreography was tight, and the energy across both nights was the kind of thing that makes you understand why this group has climbed so fast. But almost immediately after the shows wrapped, the conversation online shifted away from the performances themselves and toward the styling choices behind them, specifically the stage outfits assigned to two of the group's youngest members. Clips began circulating widely, and it didn't take long for the discourse to turn into something much bigger than a fashion critique. Here's the part that's been sitting uncomfortably with a lot of fans. Some of the costuming choices during these shows were widely described online as being far more revealing and mature than what would typically be considered age-appropriate for performers still in their teens. And when a wave of that footage started getting shared across platforms outside the usual K-pop fan spaces, the tone shifted from "this outfit is a bit much" to something far more serious. Concern about the kind of attention young idols get exposed to when styling choices like this go viral in the wrong corners of the internet. This isn't a new conversation for BABYMONSTER either, and that's honestly the part that deserves more attention than it's getting. Rewind to the group's Sheesh era, and you'll find similar criticism. Rewind further to the 2025 Love Monsters fan concert tour, and the same pattern shows up again. Styling decisions for the group's younger members drawing pushback from international fans in particular, while the agency largely stayed quiet or made only minor, unannounced adjustments after the backlash had already peaked. That's the through line here. This isn't a single unfortunate wardrobe decision at one show. It's a pattern that keeps repeating itself year after year, comeback after comeback, and every time it happens, the conversation resets to zero because YG has never addressed it directly. And that's really the core of why MONSTIEZ are speaking out right now, not because they're trying to tear down the group, and not because they think the members did anything wrong. Quite the opposite. The overwhelming sentiment across fan spaces has been protective. Fans have been careful, and rightfully so, to direct their frustration at the people making the decisions, the stylists, the creative directors, the agency, rather than at the idols who are, at the end of the day, teenagers following instructions from the adults responsible for their careers. That distinction matters a lot in how this conversation has unfolded. This isn't fans turning on their favorites. It's fans trying to protect them. So, what exactly are people asking for? If you strip away the noise, the actual demand from fans has been pretty consistent and honestly pretty reasonable. Age-appropriate styling for underage members, more transparency from YG about who's making these creative calls, and some kind of acknowledgement that this keeps happening instead of the usual silence. It's not an unreasonable ask. It's the kind of accountability fans of other groups have pushed for successfully in the past, and it's the kind of standard that a company managing a group with members as young as 17 should probably already have in place, without fans needing to demand it. It's worth remembering, too, that this is happening against the backdrop of a genuinely massive tour. The CHOOM World Tour isn't a small run. It's expanded into a multi-continent schedule covering dozens of cities across Asia, Oceania, and beyond, all while the group balances comeback promotion, brand partnerships, and the physical demands of performing night after night. That scale is part of why fans are so insistent on getting this right early. If styling concerns aren't addressed now, in the tour's opening stretch, there's a real worry that the same choices simply get repeated show after show, city after city, for the better part of a year, amplifying the exact problem fans are trying to flag before it becomes the tour's defining narrative instead of the music. Now here's where it gets a little more complicated, And this is worth sitting with for a second, because the discourse hasn't been unanimous. There's a real split in how fans are processing this, and it's worth understanding both sides honestly instead of pretending everyone agrees. A portion of fans, particularly some domestic Korean fans, have pushed back on the framing entirely, arguing that these looks are simply standard stage fashion in the high-concept, high-fashion image YG has built for this group, and that treating every bold styling choice as inherently inappropriate risks infantilizing performers who are, legally and professionally, working idols. It's a perspective that comes from a genuine place too. Nobody wants to see young artists denied creative expression just because of their age, especially in an industry where visual concept is such a core part of the artistry. But even accounting for that pushback, the deeper issue a lot of fans keep circling back to isn't really about whether an outfit is too sexy by some subjective standard. It's about a company's responsibility to its youngest talent, full stop. It's the difference between an idol choosing bold, mature styling as part of their own artistic identity once they're established and comfortable with that choice, versus an agency making that decision for a 17-year-old without much visible consideration for what happens once that footage leaves the concert venue and starts getting shared, clipped, and recontextualized across the internet. That's the line MONSTIEZ are trying to draw, and it's a genuinely difficult line for any agency to manage well. But it's also exactly the kind of thing a company with YG's resources and experience should be equipped to handle better than this. It's also worth zooming out here, because this isn't just a BABYMONSTER problem, and pretending it is would be missing the point entirely. The sexualization of underage idols has been one of the most persistent, uncomfortable conversations in K-pop for years now, cutting across companies and generations of groups. What makes this moment different isn't that it's happening, it's that BABYMONSTER, as one of the industry's most closely watched rookie acts, has become something of a case study for how these decisions get made, and how agencies respond, or don't respond, when fans push back. Every time this conversation resurfaces without a real answer from YG, it reinforces the idea that fan concern alone isn't enough to change anything. And that's a pattern the broader industry needs to reckon with, not just this one company. There's also a generational shift happening in how fans are engaging with this issue, and it's worth pointing out because it's genuinely different from how these conversations used to play out. A few years ago, this kind of criticism tended to stay contained within dedicated fan spaces, Twitter threads, fan forums, maybe a few comments on an official post that would get buried within hours. What's happening now is different. International fans are organizing more visibly, translating concerns across languages, and cross-referencing this incident with the group's own history, building a documented timeline rather than letting each controversy exist in isolation. That shift matters, because it means agencies can't rely on the news cycle simply moving on the way it used to. The conversation is being archived, referenced, and brought back up every time something similar happens, which is exactly why this latest incident landed as hard as it did. It wasn't received as an isolated event, it was received as confirmation of a pattern fans had already been tracking. That kind of organized, sustained fan pressure has actually worked before in this industry, which is part of why MONSTIEZ aren't just venting into the void here. Other fandoms have successfully pushed agencies to walk back concept decisions, adjust choreography, or issue clarifications after similar backlash, so there's real precedent for this kind of advocacy leading somewhere. It's part of why the tone from most fans hasn't been despair or resignation. It's been persistence. The expectation isn't that one video or one trending hashtag fixes everything overnight. It's that consistent, visible pressure eventually forces a response, the same way it has for other groups facing comparable scrutiny. So where does that leave things? As of now, YG Entertainment hasn't issued any public statement addressing the styling choices from the Seoul shows, despite the volume and consistency of fan concern. Whether that changes as the CHOOM World Tour continues through the rest of its international dates remains to be seen, and honestly, that silence is its own kind of answer for a lot of fans watching closely. What's clear is that this conversation isn't going away just because the news cycle moves on to the next city on the tour. MONSTIEZ have made their position known, and it's a position rooted in wanting better for the members they support, not less visibility for BABYMONSTER, but more responsibility from the people managing them. If this is a conversation you care about, not just for BABYMONSTER, but for how the industry treats its youngest performers in general, let us know your take in the comments below. And if you want more honest breakdowns of what's actually happening around this group instead of just surface-level content, subscribe and stay tuned for what comes next. Ahyeon.